Okay. Now, the first question that you have is, how are student roles assigned when participating in literature circles?
Mm-hmm.
Second is, how do students feel when they mediate literature circles presented in class? And the third is, how do teachers interact and mediate the process of the literature circle?
Yes.
Now, my first observation would be that I didn't feel like you really addressed enough the first question. How are student roles assigned when participating in literature circles? Now, I was very much looking too at the order in which you presented your results and discussion. So I basically copied your research questions here, and I was looking in the same order. At the very beginning of your result and discussion section, I was looking pretty much for answer to question 1, and then question 2, question 3. So my first thing, I felt like you had almost too much information about the second. You had a lot of information about how students feel and their perspective or their point of view. And for me, their point of view, their perspective, their feelings, for me is kind of all about question number 2. How do students feel when they mediate literature circles? Now, here's the thing here. The second question is, how do students feel when they mediate literature circles? Now, for me, that means when they mediated, not the teacher, but the students.
Yes.
All right. And if that's what you want to talk about, fine. And that's what you talked about, fine. But we also have this where the teachers mediated. So if you have information about the students and how they feel about the teachers mediating also, if you're talking about both, how they feel about how they mediate, how they feel about the teacher mediating, then we perhaps need to modify slightly that second question to include both the teacher mediation and the students. Because I think you have some data in there, if I remember right, where the teacher says, the students say, I like when the teacher intervenes, or because there's more organization. I can't remember one of those, right? So that's fine if you're talking about both, but that we might need to modify slightly this second research question to include both how they feel about their own mediation versus the teacher. See what I mean?
Kind of.
Right? Because here you say, how do students feel when they, students, mediate? But you don't have a question about how students feel about when the teacher mediates. So, and I remember, I think that you, in fact, I remember more about the students, how they felt about how the teachers mediated. You need to ask yourself, go back and see, if you have data that supports how do the students feel about how they mediate themselves, then we need to modify this research question to include both. Let's say that you only have evidence of students' perspective or expressing how they feel about teachers mediating only, then just say that in the research question. Talk about teacher mediating. See what I'm saying? So I want to match the question to what you have instead of making major changes here. I want to make sure that you need to make sure that you're answering your research question. So at the end of the day, if we need to tweak a little bit, change slightly those research questions, we need to do that. So we can say we are answering our questions. Because if you don't, you're going to be saying, well, the students feel this about how the teachers mediate. We look at the research. Well, which research question is this answer? Right? Yes. All of every evidence that you have, every single piece of evidence, every paragraph, you need to say, okay, this answers this question. This paragraph answers this question. Right? Always ask yourself, go back and say, okay, which questions am I answering? Yes. And obviously, too, looking more holistically, looking at the whole section, does the order make sense? Should I talk about this first and then this, vice versa? So here, and when we look at your results section here, okay, all right, I'm gonna suggest that you say like assignment, role assignment, or roles assignments, plural also. to mean the process of assigning roles.
Yes.
Okay. So I would use a different form of this word. So students assigning roles to their partners and to themselves help develop their own voice. Now, this, we're still, maybe have a paragraph before this. How do they assign roles? Very specifically, how do they do it? Like, when you look at your transcripts and they start forming their groups, what do they start to talk about first? I mean, what happens? Do they all assign someone a role? Do they all say, okay, and they're all talking amongst themselves, okay, Juan is going to be the leader? Or does just Juan just say, okay, everybody do this, and everybody says, okay? See what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, those are just two examples that I'm thinking. But look at your data and look at the language, look at the conversations, and all it might just mean looking at the transcripts from the dialogues and saying, okay, Juan just started talking. He said this, and just one or two sentences, and then you comment, this is how he started. He just assumed the role. Or maybe there was an interaction and the students. So I think this is an important question, and it's a question that you really need to prepare yourself for a good answer. They're going to ask, well, how do they assign roles? It's an interesting question, and it should be something that you should present.
Yes.
And you can talk to the teachers. Maybe you have information where you ask to the teacher. It could be the teacher's perspective, like how do students assign their own roles, just to see what they say. Do you have to intervene as a teacher, or do they do it on their own? What do you know about how they? Maybe they know something, maybe they don't. And if they don't have much information to say, fine, just say whatever it is they say. And you mentioned that how much the teacher knows or doesn't know about that process.
Yes.
And then obviously your observations. What did you observe? Did you observe them talking a lot? You've got your transcripts, and that's where you can kind of bring in direct quotes. Okay, so maybe inserting a paragraph here at the very beginning. Now it can be one paragraph or two paragraphs, depending on how much evidence you have and how you want to present the evidence and the discussion. But I really want you to hone in on the answer. How do the students themselves form the groups? Now, another part of that question is, what does the teacher do? So, does the teacher assign the group or not? Right? And I don't know, do you have examples where the students form their own groups? Or did the teacher form the groups in all?
Is that in the first literature? Well, there were two literature circles. In the first one, the teacher assigned the roles by numbering the students.
Okay.
And on the second one, they assigned themselves, but I didn't ask them in the focus group or like, I have to check the recordings.
Okay.
The discussion recordings and the organization recordings. But I don't remember like a specific moment.
All right, well, check to see what you have.
Yeah.
If you don't have enough information to address that question, then we take the question out.
Because, well, here I have all my information, and I like to bring it all of the tutorings.
Yeah.
And, here I have the transcriptions, and in the transcription, I didn't ask that question like specific, like all the circles. And the pre-selection.
But did you observe though? That's the thing, because you could, as long as you have two data sources, your observation and the teacher's. Well, the recording is part of your observation and the teacher. then you might still be able to use
Yeah.
that. So
I have some observations, but as they were like three virtual circles at the moment, selecting themselves the groups and the rows, I was not able to listen well.
but you recorded each group, right?
Yeah, but on the discussion, not on the oh gosh, on the selection of the members and the role and
Ah,
situation.
yeah. Okay. Entonces, first one. You're the first one.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
I didn't know.
That's fine. We'll plan on it for the final, and I'll upload a video to explain how to do that. Next week, we'll continue. I'll give you feedback. If we need to meet, because after this week, basically there are no more tutoring sessions. So if you guys need to meet with me, just let me know. We can schedule a time, but I'd like to schedule it so I'll make sure that I'm here. So if any time we need to discuss anything, just let me know. We can schedule that. Okay?
Thank
All
you.
right. See you. Bye.
Bye. So,
So
yeah, I have much
So-
more information about the teacher assigning the roles, but not so much. But I have to check the recording.
I mean, if you have something, for me, it's really an interesting thing. Like both the teacher, how the teacher, and this is like mediation. This is like the essence of mediation. How they are assigning roles because they're mediating. They're using language to mediate constantly. So
Yes.
just see what you have. If you don't think you have enough,
Mhm.
better not to ask the question. Or if you have a lot of information about how the teacher intervened, not so much from the student, modify the question to include only the teacher intervention.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, you decide what you need to do there. But really, don't forget about that first question, because especially it's right off the bat, and they're going to ask questions about that if we decide to leave that in. We want to make sure that you have included that in the results discussion section. Okay. Now, a lot of the paragraphs in general, I didn't feel that some of the evidence directly related to the topics. Now, to fix that, you either need to modify the topic sentence and/or modify the evidence. But I really want you to pay close attention to each paragraph and ask yourself if the evidence is supporting it, the main idea. Is it an example? Okay, so let's take an example. So students assign roles to their partners and to themselves. And it helps to develop their own voice, perspective, and career. So students assign roles
It's much,
to their own partners.
the paragraph is much more about how do they feel when they assign.
Yeah.
But there is not like a direct quote in which I have like saying like Juanito, you have to do this, and well, they're giving the direct like command.
Right. Or it may not even be a command. It may just be somebody assuming the rules.
Yes.
Right. So that's one thing here that I wanted to bring to your attention here is that we have this evidence. The students were able to enrich their knowledge on the topic. It was a very repetitive thing. And I say it was repetitive, not listening to the same thing. So for me, this evidence, if I just read this evidence, it sounds like that the student is saying that they like to work in literature circles because they don't have to keep listening to the same thing. Or how do you interpret, or how will the reader interpret this? We, the students, were enriched our knowledge about the topic, and it was not very repetitive to not be listening to the same thing. Like, what are they talking about? Not listening to the same thing, like the teacher, or listening to an audio, Or what did they? What's the context here?
Oh, they were listening to the other classmates with the different roles. For
They were
example, one
listening.
was the illustrator, the other the summarizer. Even if they were talking about the same reading, they have each one a different perspective.
Okay, so but this student, what is? I'm not following. So what is the? All right, the literature circle. They started off first by all of the questioners like together, right? It was a
Mhm.
by rule.
Mhm.
Are they commenting about that?
Mm.
See, are they commenting about? I'm still not sure about this. What they're listening, it wasn't repetitive.
Students
Like
listening
listening.
to the students.
What do they mean by that? What does the students mean? What do they
It's
mean?
pretty much about the other way around. When students have the freedom to, it's not about when they were like with the same role. It's much more when they have different roles.
But what are they referring to when they say it wasn't repetitive? Because they say, and it was not very repetitive to not be listening to the same thing. ¿Qué quieren decir ellos
Mhm.
con este aspecto? Wasn't very repetitive. What wasn't very repetitive? What are they referring to? It says here, we were able to enrich our knowledge, pero haciendo qué? Haciendo esa actividad, ese
Mhm.
literature, okay, about the topic, and it was not very repetitive. Como que hay otros tipos de actividades que son muy repetitivo, así escuchando siempre la misma cosa. Eso es
Mhm.
como yo entiendo.
Oh, I got it now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
On the second literature circle, the teacher assigned different readings to each of the circles.
Okay.
One had one reading, another had another different, and the other had obviously other. When they discussed it, when they discussed their reading, it was not repetitive because even if it was from London, one was talking about the transportation, another one was talking about the museums, another one was talking about the population, for example. And it was not very repetitive, but they were talking about the same uh,
reading.
reading that is London.
Okay, so all right, so even though they were reading the same thing, it wasn't repetitive. Okay. All right. All right. So
Maybe
so
before.
for me, this is a comment about just how they liked, how they felt about the literature circle.
Yes, basically.
Not so much it has for me. I don't see any link to that evidence to assigning roles. It's just they felt they liked the activity.
Mhm. Yes.
And probably this quote, you can use it maybe later on when you address the second research question. How do students feel when they mediate literature circles?
Mhm.
Right? And part of this might be how they feel about mediating literature circles. How do they feel about participating in literature circles?
Mhm.
Or maybe the participation is linked with the mediation, but it's more related to how they feel. The second question.
Maybe.
And it's not so much linked
Mhm.
to the assigning of roles. And then here, in the words of the teacher, so the students get familiarized with the strategy, probably they will have the kind of freedom so that they can choose their own role. All right, so that's kind of related to assigning your own roles. Okay, I see a link there, but giving them freedom so they can probably assign their own rules. Okay. Now I'm asking, how does this relate? I see that it relates to how they reach their own role, but you might need to discuss this later to explain that. I mean, a lot of this is not just the evidence, but later too how you explain it. But this, make sure that you explain it later in the second part, because I was really focusing on this first part. What the strategy probably will have a kind of freedom, so that they're so yeah. This probably is okay. All right, this relates a little bit more to assigning roles. Now the next one, students arrange their own teams and assign roles as well. Students are now. I'm saying here, how do they do this? Like, okay, show some evidence. What do they do? What do they say? How do they do? I mean, that's the essence there that we need. We need like examples there to talk precisely about this. And since this paragraph, it looks like this is all evidence, no? And this is analyzed?
Yes,
correct?
One paragraph of evidence and the other.
Okay, so provide the evidence. Don't discuss. You provide evidence, and you can link it. You know, but the idea is that you dive right into the evidence examples. So all these sentences should be evidence. Another student mentioned her preference for assigning her own role during the focus group. I prefer to choose my own role because I think if you choose the one you think is better for yourself, all right, that's good, all right, but this is how the student feels. See that? I mean, this is pertaining to student roles, but it's still about how they feel. You're still not talking about how they assign the roles. See what I mean? And this, you can use this. A lot of this information is good. You're going to use all of this. What I want you to think about is the order, the coherence, making everything very clear, and being able to recognize, in this case, it's a preference. You still need to say, okay, what happened? Just what happened? Did one student start to talk before the other? What did they say? That's essentially what you're looking for. And the teacher's perspective, asking the teacher how the teacher feels. What does the teacher do and say to either foster or promote this to happen, or hinder? Cause it, maybe it, so these are the data sources that I think will help you get what you need. Anytime you have a preference, if the students feel this, categorize it under that second question. And you're going to have a lot of information. I feel you're going to have to get rid of some of that information about the students' feelings to add more room for how the students roles. Based on the research questions as you have it. You need to look at all your data. And if you just say, I just don't have enough information to talk about that, fine. Modify or get rid of a research question. At the end of the day, I want to make sure very, very explicitly and simply that you are answering all of your research. There's not like a research question that's kind of floating out there that you don't really talk much about, because they will ask you. I mean, all the questions that they ask you, all the questions that they're going to ask you come from the research questions. So this is all kind of preparing you to do that, to answer both. They'll both here and in your oral presentation. So let's take a look at another example now. This is a little bit different, but it's related, and again, to coherence. This is the second paragraph, which is an analysis. You do a good job here. You have a topic sentence. That's good. Now, the purpose of the second paragraph is to discuss what you just talked about. Now, we'll need to make some changes here, but one thing I want to draw your attention to is actually two things. The second sentence here, you jump right to a citation. And in this particular paragraph, I think you have 3 or 4 citations. I would recommend that you first, in your own words, discuss the evidence. So you interpret it in your own words, original idea. Talk about the evidence and talk about what it means. Critique it, analyze it, synthesize it, even make recommendations. And when you present your original ideas, support your original ideas with the citations. That is, the citations come later to support what you just said. Because what the tendency that you are making here, what's happening is, I feel that, one, that you're jumping right to the citation without offering your own interpretation first. And there sometimes is a disconnect between the citations and the authors versus what you presented in the evidence.
Yes,
That's
I
kind of,
did it like here's the citation and then my explanation. Citation, explanation.
I would do it the other way, and in your own discussion, tie it into the evidence more, right?
Mhm.
It should be, even though this is a separate paragraph, you are talking specifically about this
Mhm.
evidence only, or any other evidence that you talked about prior, but very specific. Right? So one thing is to clean up this evidence here to make that, and that'll help. And then in the discussion, really tell me, okay, so ¿y qué? Pues dime, ¿qué significa esto?
Mhm.
¿Qué significa toda esta evidencia?
Mhm.
¿Sí? And this topic sentence needs to be very much related to the topic sentence from this prior. Very much the same, but different in the sense that this is going to be an interpretation. What does it mean? But it's still more. This needs to be more related to the topics, the prior topics.
Mhm.
This discussion needs to be more related to this. So make those connections. Remember here, a lot of what we're talking about. You've got all this information. You spent hours and hours. You
Yes.
know this information. You know the data. Right now, what I'm working with you on is making yourself be understood. A reader wants to read this and understand what it is that you have to say.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
that's what I think if we make some of these modifications, I think this will help you be better understood. And that's the point. That's the goal. So the second thing I want to mention here is perhaps you could use slightly less citations.
Yes.
I mean, you don't want to go overboard. I would rather you have more of your own discussion, maybe just one or maybe two citations, but more you,
Mhm.
your own interpretation, because this is really about you, and you want to give support. You want to have the support of the authors, but based on what you say. So that's kind of my thinking: is first you discuss it and you relate it to here, and then that might make sense here, because since you're jumping to this, my first reaction is, well, how does this relate to the evidence? But if you clean this evidence up, you add your own discussion first, then this might be clear for me.
Mhm. Yes.
So I'm not necessarily saying that you need to get rid of this or move it. I want you to change the evidence here, make some discussions, and then you ask yourself, okay, does this link it? Am I making the connections here?
Or maybe read it again and restructure the paragraph. Well, first
Restructure.
of all, clear the evidence. My question is in the analysis sentences. Um, well, this is kind of obvious, but I don't know how to do it. How do I I have to mention again the evidence, even if I was choosing the first plan in which I.
You don't have to restate the evidence,
Uh-huh.
but you have to reference it. Like you will say, this you might paraphrase a little bit here, just to provide context. You might say, teachers are in the custody. Let's see. I prefer to choose my own roles because I like to choose one that is better for yourself, more abilities to play that role. So you might say, okay, now the one thing that you left off here and that you might mention is, did other students feel the same way?
Mm-hmm.
Or was this one student out of many? So a lot of the evidence too, make sure that you reference, is this a general feeling amongst other, or in this case, students?
Like
Or is this student very different?
Mm-hmm.
And there's another perspective out there from the students. Well, this is perspective, but you get the idea.
I think in the next sentence it says
There's a
also-
complimentary comments that made this. There's a complimentary students. Well, you say that another student said this, but you've got, in this case, 4 students.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, and the main thing is, try to give an idea as to numbers, like, because the direct quote is always coming from one person.
Yeah, obviously.
So in this case, you've got 4 students,
Mhm.
and so if there is a difference, just somehow to articulate that. You could just say, this is very similar to the others, or 2 other students felt the same, In that way, we get a
And I have to
perspective.
mention from which instrument I was taking that information.
It's not necessary to mention it explicitly because a lot of it will be implicit. For example, you may say, the teacher in the class this. No reason to say, I observed this. You just say, the teacher said this in the class. The teacher mentioned this. Now, depending on the context, you may say during the interview, the teacher said this. But if it's obvious or if it's not even relevant, it doesn't really matter if you name the source, the data source.
Yeah, but in case of the students, like you said, one student mentioned a quote, and then I had three other students feel pretty much the same.
Right.
On
Yeah.
From the self evaluation, or no?
No, I don't think so. Because if you say, well, it depends. Like, yeah, if you say that one of the students said in class this, well, that's a bad example. If you say one of the students stated that the student feels this, you know it's an interview. Usually.
Yes.
If the student said something like they feel some way in class, then you say the student said in class that, then you know it's an observation. So any other complementary information you say that all the other students felt the same, it's going to apply to the same data source.
That is
right. So if they say one student says, "Oh, I feel like this in class," so you say one student in class mentioned that they feel like this. The other students mentioned that they felt the same. Well, you're talking about in class. You're talking about an observation.
But what if it is like what?
An interview?
Or well, on the self-evaluation, I have some questions at the bottom, and then I can count the students' opinions. For example, let me see. All the questions were answered correctly. Because I'm not good representing the main ideas with graphics.
Right, but these are all perspectives. So all perspectives are going to be pretty much from questionnaires or interviews. I'd almost have to read it, but I think it's okay to mention it every once in a while, but don't feel like you have to mention it all the time. Because sometimes we say every data source and it gets too much. You evaluate it. If it makes sense, if you think you want to mention it, mention it. Just don't overdo it, and I'll help you with that when I read it. If you're doing it too much, I'll let you know. But you don't always have to say, I observed this, I observed that, or whatever. So here, okay, go back to your question. In the second paragraph, just mention, okay, the students felt, because the students felt like this, and the teacher felt like this is how teachers are mediating, or this is how the roles develop, just by initiation, just by the conversation, or it was a deliberate, intentional effort where language was being mediated between students to assign certain roles. And then you can talk about different other aspects of your theory. Okay, in your discussion, always look back in your theory to use keywords to tie in to anything that you mentioned here. And that's where also your citations will come in later.
Because I remember, while writing the evidence, pretty much what I did, I take quotes from the students, and then I contrasted with the teachers, pretty much in most of the paragraph.
Okay.
So
in all one paragraph. So you're basically developing evidence paragraphs, and then analyze paragraphs, and then evidence paragraphs.
For example, in once I was talking about the students' feelings, but also I include what that teacher perceived that students were like expressing more.
Yeah, that's fine. As long as the analysis is really talking directly about what it is. And this example here, part of the problem is the evidence here. And this influences, I think, part of this. But here, I think if you just start talking about, like, okay, is this good or bad? Critique it, evaluate it, analyze it, right? Compare and contrast it, talk more maybe about the differences in opinions. What does this mean? This is where the higher order of thinking comes in. This is actually now you're able to give your opinion about this, and you want to again use a lot of those key words or the wording from your literature review so that you sound like you know what you're talking about, right? It's not just you want to try to tie it into the literature.
Because I try to do it, but in some of the cases of the analysis, I didn't mention like the opposite side. I only mentioned like the supporting ideas, but not like the contrasting.
Okay. Well, yeah. Depending on, I mean, that's another important aspect is the other side, the contrasting, and you know, you're comparing and contrasting your results also with the experts. So if you have, you know, if your opinion is the same or different than another expert, that's where you discuss it. You're basically making an argument. It's an argumentative essay. So you do want to include rebuttals. You want to include the other side of the argument, the counter argument, whenever you can, just much like you did in the literature. But you are essentially making a judgment here as to the relevance of your own data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on here. So a lot of my comments is just basically that looking at each paragraph, frequency use of rules, frequent use of rules, and freedom students acquire. Frequent use of rules.
It is based on students and teacher opinion. They mentioned that as long as they get familiarized with literature circles, they will be able to choose their own roles. But if the students are not familiarized with the roles, if they are like novice, they may not be able to work independently.
All right, so as they get used to the rules. So getting used to the rules, instead of maybe frequent use of rules, maybe getting used to the rules or adapting to the rules, I think is what you want to say here. So getting used to the rules. So is this now where assigning roles? All right, tell me again the main sections of your results and discussion. The first is, how do you want to organize this? Do you want to organize it in 2 or 3 sections?
I had in total 3 claims, and they were supported by 2 paragraphs. The fifth one was
2 or 3 sections. Sorry. 2. You want 2 or 3 sections? Like main sections. Like, si vamos a dividirlo en partes, ¿cuántas partes? Como 2 o 3.
Well, at the beginning, I thought it would be better if I had 3 because of the research questions that were 3. However, thinking and checking my information, going back to all the process, but maybe there is like not enough information to asking the principal question, the one at the top.
Okay.
So
the
maybe
first
it would be
section.
better, I don't know, maybe to divide it into 2.
So you don't want to talk about anything about how they applied, how they assigned the roles?
I would like to, but I found it at this point much more complicated to go back to the recordings, and because some of the part I didn't transcribe like everything. I transcribed the focus groups. I listened the recording, but as I told you, the recordings are about the discussion, not about how do they decide to assign the roles.
Right. All right. So then let's look. So the first, how do students feel? Now, what do you want to talk about first? How students feel, or how do teachers interact? and mediate, or something else? How do you want to divide this up?
I'm not sure. Maybe, well, the way in which the questions are already arranged. First the second one and then the third one, which is how the students feel when they mediate literature circles.
You don't want to talk about how the teachers interact first? Because this I see is providing context to this.
Yeah.
Like if to understand how the teachers interact,
That students
and then
somehow they have to control the activity and model the examples, and then through the practice and the students getting used to the roles, they may be able to work and work by themselves.
and then you modify this. How do students feel when teachers mediate? Or how do students feel about how teachers mediate, how the teacher mediates? Okay, ¿cómo? Porque también tenemos que adaptar este.
Or maybe keep that the same, like how do students feel when they mediate, and another one that says how do students feel when teacher mediates. And I have a lot of information of students mentioning
Alright,
that
so
they agree with students.
alright, so let's do this one. Let's talk about this one first. Now, how do teachers interact? Now, this is not about how they feel, it's just how they interact. So do you feel you have enough information from different data sources to talk about that question? Yes? So how do teachers... Like, let me write this out. So how do teachers... This, we're going to move... Yeah. So, how do students feel when they mediate literature?
Maybe the question number 3, maybe a bridge between question number 1 and number 3.
I'm sorry?
So the first one,
Yeah.
it's, well, it sounds like in order. But what about switching the question number 2 and 3?
Yeah. So this one first.
We pass from teachers setting the...
So how do teachers feel? Okay. Yep.
Mediating the class.
That sounds good.
As a final objective, students mediating the...
Good. All right. So now, word count. You've got... Pull out our handy dandy calculator. 200 divided by 3. You're going to have approximately, and this can vary, but approximately 750 words per section. Okay?
Yeah. Even I was taking the count. I was, well, counting approximately 853 words per each one. Well, probably a maximum.
Right, but remember that there's your conclusion is part of this, and that's 250 words.
Because here I have like...
And I think your conclusion, you have almost 360.
Yeah.
So I think I made a comment also to kind of bring that back and try to reduce it down to 2 or 3 paragraphs. In fact, it could be 1 or 2 paragraphs. And get it closer to 250 words. And then I think you can scale back your word count here, approximately 750 words. Yes. So how do teachers interact, mediate? How about if you just say, how do teachers mediate? Interaction. How do students feel when their teacher mediates leadership? Yeah. So how do teachers mediate interaction during a literature session? Okay. So organize your thoughts now. Each one of these sections. Okay, these are going to be level 2 headings. And organize your paragraphs. What are you going to talk about first? Now, small ideas about each one of these. Making sure you have evidence and analysis. Okay? So think about that. Look at the rest of my comments, and we'll continue making changes next week. Okay?
I have like a super big question.
Yeah.
For tomorrow, I have to bring the document, but today I have to work from 1 to 6, and
Okay.
I have to make some corrections to the references.
All right. My count. All right. This printed feedback here, I'm going to give the other tutors the day of the mock presentation. But I'm not going to make any. I'm not going to make changes here. All my edits are going to continue being in Google Drive until the very end.
So I can.
So if you don't make whatever you make the changes, whatever you have time to make, and I'm going to be working from here.
Okay.
So when you make changes, as you've done, remove my comments, clean it up. I see if there's some left, then I know you're still working on those, and we'll work on that. I see we'll continue working like that. You'll have next week and a couple more weeks to continue making making changes. I would make these as soon as possible.
Yeah.
If you want me to look at it again, in fact, I would prefer you come in. We look at it again together, just as we're doing today. I'll make a scene. We'll continue doing what we're doing today. But I would rather you be here at this point, here with me, so that I can clarify and talk to you, discuss this, so that I know that you understand. So we're not wasting time. That I'm sending email, information here. You're not sure, since we don't have much time left. So that's how I would prefer to work. Continuing to work here. And I would just print. I'm telling everyone, if it looks halfway decent, to print directly from Google Drive, not to move it to Word, where then you might make changes on Word, and you've got different versions, and so that we continue working like this until the very, very end. Until the very last thing is downloaded, and just make any changes to formats, and then print it out. So do whatever you can to get these changes in. Understand that if you don't make the changes, maybe the other tutors will comment on things that we've already talked about. But
it was very good.
The idea that I want you to be really focused on is coherence, like breaking this down. And I think this maybe the newer, these 3 headings, I think will help. Right? You have the data. Look at your data and just organize it. Take every single paragraph and just dissect every paragraph. One of the comments I mentioned too here is that you have on some of your evidence paragraphs, you're missing a linking sentence. Like the very last paragraph is evidence. So you know that you're missing a linking sentence. Every sentence, try to link so that it flows to that each idea goes from one to the next. That you're not just dropping off an idea like sometimes that you're doing with some of your paragraphs. That's another thing. But really look at all of this information here, and I think it'll get you closer to where we need to be. Really. And next week we start our presentations. You can choose any two classmates to observe. You'll have a final reflection due at the end of the second week of the month presentation. So don't forget that. It's worth, I think, 12 points. So make sure you include in your reflection your own feedback from your own presentation as well as feedback from two other students. And what else?
What about the grades? Well,
The grades I'm going to wait till the very end now. Right now I'm just going to give feedback. Yeah, of all of them.
All the ones.
I'm not even going to upload grades now for the results and discussion. I'm giving all of you feedback, and I want to see the very last product. It's all done.
Well, before you mentioned that if we correct the lead review and the method procedure,
I'll go back and change all the grades accordingly how I think you should be graded for the final project.
Mm-hmm.
So I will do that.
In my case, I also correct those sections.
That's fine, and I'll go back and I'll make those changes. No problem. But right now, I just want to wait. I don't want to keep going back and making changes to the grades. Right now, I just want to see the final. Right now, I help you get to the final product, and then when I get the final product, go back and look at all of your grades and adjust accordingly. Okay.
Today we'll continue modifying information, but as much as I can.
Try to change as much as you can, and then you let me know next week if we need to discuss anything, and we'll take another look at it if you want me to look at it again.
Yes. Just a favor, teacher, can I check the research questions once again?
Sure.
The new order.
Okay, thank you. And these are word counts are approximate, so just try to get more or less. You don't want to have one paragraph for one of these, right? But you want more or less the equal amounts. All right, Fernando, any other questions, concerns?